Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, IBD with me, Maddie. If you're new here, my name is Maddie and I have IBD. Now, living with a chronic illness that has no cure means that my relationship with medications over the years has been a little bit of a wild ride. So if you've watched any of my previous videos, you might be wondering, how do I manage my Crohn's disease day by day now versus how things were back when I was first diagnosed? So today I wanted to take you through my full medication journey from when I was first diagnosed at 15, 16 years old and I was navigating heavy steroid use all the way through to when I hit a total wall and I had tried literally every medication that there was available at the time, all the way through to my stoma surgeries that I've had done and how I manage my health today. So why don't you grab yourself a beverage, get comfortable, and we will dive in together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, IBD with me, Maddie. If you're new here, my name is Maddie and I have IBD. Now, living with a chronic illness that has no cure means that my relationship with medications over the years has been a little bit of a wild ride. So if you've watched any of my previous videos, you might be wondering, how do I manage my Crohn's disease day by day now versus how things were back when I was first diagnosed? So today I wanted to take you through my full medication journey from when I was first diagnosed at 15, 16 years old and I was navigating heavy steroid use all the way through to when I hit a total wall and I had tried literally every medication that there was available at the time, all the way through to my stoma surgeries that I've had done and how I manage my health today. So why don't you grab yourself a beverage, get comfortable, and we will dive in together. So to give you a little bit of context then, so although when I was a toddler, I did have bowel issues and I would go to the hospital and see the doctors there, that was always as an outpatient and it was always as part of a clinic appointment. I was never actually admitted to the hospital. My first hospital admission wasn't until I was 15 years old and I was on a mixed ward of male and female and I didn't have my family with me, so it was a completely overwhelming experience for me for my very first time ever being in hospital and even just dealing with being unwell to that level. But I didn't actually get my official confirmed Crohn's disease diagnosis until literally the week of my 16th birthday. And that is when I first started steroids. So whenever I did have a flare up back in the early days, so for me that was 2009, 2010, that's when my disease started to make itself known. So whenever I did have a flare up back then, the go-to treatment would always be a really high dose intense round of intravenous corticosteroids in a hospital, and that would usually be budesonide or prednisolone for about 5 days or more, and then you would get switched over to tablet form that you would then be able to be discharged and take home with you to gradually wean yourself off of. It is so important that when you're on steroids for an autoimmune disease that you take them as directed by your medical professional. So, for example, I didn't do that at one point, and the reason it is so vital that you take the steroids as recommended is because generally you start off at quite a high dose. So that can be anywhere from 60 milligrams to 100 milligrams 3 to 4 times a day. And that's when you're in hospital, IV. So when you switch to tablet form, it's no different. And during that time, what happens is your adrenal gland it sort of goes on holiday, because while you're taking the steroids, your body's getting the exact same chemicals that that gland would produce. So the gland goes away on holiday, takes itself off on a little break, and the body continues to function. Now, while you're gradually tailoring yourself off the steroids, that gives your gland a chance to come back from vacation and get back into the working routine of picking up where the steroids are leaving off and helping to produce that cortisol. Now, if you're on a high dose, like 80 milligrams 4 times a day of steroids, and you just suddenly decide, you know what, I've had enough of all the side effects, I've had enough of taking these pills, I've just had enough of what they're making me feel like, I'm going to stop taking them. Your body is going to hit the panic button, because your gland isn't going to suddenly be aware that it's expected to wake up and get to work right away. And the body, meanwhile, is going to be waiting for the gland to be producing all this cortisol, which isn't going to happen. And that's when you can go into what's known as Addisonian or adrenal crisis. And that is very, very dangerous. So please make sure that you are taking them as advised. And if you are struggling with them, please speak to somebody of a medical profession. You don't have to just have all or nothing, okay? And speaking of side effects, I mean, steroids can be an absolute lifesaver in a crisis. There's no doubt about that. But the side effects, they are absolutely brutal. For me, myself, I experienced extreme weight gain. So I'm 4'11", and I, at that time, being 16 years old, was about a size 10, a UK size 8, probably 6 to 8, 8 to 10. But at my heaviest on steroids, I went up to size 16 to 18. And for that whole duration of being on steroids, I didn't want to go out in public. I didn't want to attend any parties, any social gatherings. I certainly didn't want my picture taken. I didn't want anybody to see how much weight I had actually gained. I also had a lot of water retention. Steroids leave you with a lot of retained water throughout the body, which adds to the swelling. Acne was just unreal. Like, the level of acne that the steroids produced was just a nightmare. It was so painful, and it was really embarrassing as well. And on top of that, there was just sleep disturbances. There was increased appetite, to the point where I would eat a whole packet of biscuits to myself a day. I would be eating 4 or 5 cooked meals a day. So on top of the extra weight that you're already putting on, you're then eating so much more in calories. So even when you do stop the steroids and the water retention releases and all of that, you're left with all the excess weight from all the food you've been eating. Joint pain made it so difficult at times to be able to just get up and move around. The intense ache from that. Mood swings was a nightmare for my family. Having to live with me and to be around me during that time must have been awful for them. And it certainly didn't make me feel good. I was aware of how these mood swings were happening, and I didn't like who I was on them. And of course, the final side effect that I had was the dreaded moon face, the hamster cheeks, the whole rounded lot. You really just do not feel like yourself on steroids at all. But as I said, they are absolutely crucial for trying to get a flare up of Crohn's disease back under control and into remission. So, to try to keep me in remission, we started on biologics and immunosuppressant medications to try and just help calm my immune system down and support it. But my body made that very difficult. So the first medication I was put on was azathioprine, and as a medication that actually worked quite well for me. However, it just didn't agree with me, and I was feeling constantly dizzy or nauseous, to the point where I would be walking around school And in order to get from one class to the other, I would just have to keep my hand on the wall as I was going through the halls, and I could not lift my head up, because if I was to lift my head up, I would either collapse because I would get so dizzy, or I would throw up because I would get so nauseous. So unfortunately, that was no good. So the next medication that we tried was mercaptopurine. Now, mercaptopurine was great. So that actually really did help. So I had the steroids to settle down the inflammation, and then I was put on the 50 milligrams of mercaptopurine, and I was okay for a while. Everything was good. Remission was fine. I felt fine, no side effects. And then, unfortunately, I had another flare-up not long after. So again, was in hospital, had the IV steroids, and we decided to increase the mercaptopurine because it worked fine on 50 milligrams. So the dose was raised to 75 milligrams. And within 2-3 days of that, my kidneys started to shut down on that level. So at 50 milligrams, it wasn't enough to keep the Crohn's disease in remission. And at 75 milligrams, it was shutting down my kidneys. So we had to scrap that medication. So the next one that we tried was infliximab. And infliximab is where you attend, for me, it was the clinical investigation unit, and you get an infusion of this medication over so many appointments. So for me, the first 2 infusion appointments that I had, they went okay, no problems. And then by the 3rd appointment on that dose, something happened and my body took a severe allergic reaction, and I had to get admitted to the hospital. And so that medication was definitely a no-go anymore. So after the infliximab, we tried methotrexate, and that was 1 injection every week for a 12-week trial. And by the 12th week, we checked the blood work and my symptoms, and at that point it was clear my body just wasn't responding to it. The disease was just too aggressive. And so we made the decision to stop trying any longer with the methotrexate, especially because at the time that was quite a newer developed medication, and it was quite potent as well. It was quite a strong medication. So I was in hospital and we were discussing what the options were, and it was decided we could try adalimumab, which belonged in the same family as the infliximab medication that I'd had the allergic reaction to. So there was concerns that because it was partly sort of the same makeup, whatever had caused the reaction could potentially happen again with this medication. But I weighed up the pros and cons and decided that I wanted to take the risk and try it. We did try it. There was no adverse reaction. Thankfully, I did not have any kind of negative response to it. However, my disease was far too aggressive, and it just didn't respond to that medication. And at that point, things then progressed really, really quickly. So by the time I was the age of just 19 years old, I had my very first operation for a stoma. And by the time I was just 21 years old, I had already had about 5-6 operations. And on Christmas Eve of that year that I was 21, I had a 9.5-hour operation to have a total proctocolectomy. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's basically just the surgical removal of the colon, which is the large intestine, large bowel, the rectum, and the anus is all completely removed. So I will be doing another video specifically on all my surgeries individually, but that was just a little background as to what happened to me at that point. So over the span of those 3 years then, I ended up having a total of 7 surgeries. They were all fairly major, and it just ended up being a really chaotic and really heavy time for me. I was on TPN feeds. I suffered a pulmonary embolism in my lung. I contracted MRSA after one of my operations. I had a 5-week-long intense pelvic infection that they just couldn't get on top of. I had to have a blood transfusion at one point. And then I ended up with septic abscesses in my abdomen, which was just a whole other battle that I had to deal with. So at that point in my journey, I had literally exhausted every kind of medication that there was available to me at that time. Things like vendolizumab, or I'm going to absolutely pronounce this so wrong, so I do apologize. Ustekinumab, they hadn't been either invented or even approved yet. So they were nowhere near available to me at that time. And so I'd hit the end of the road of what was possible medically at that point. There was nothing more that the consultants could suggest management wise. And so that meant that surgery really became the only path forward for me. So, if you fast forward to today, my medication management picture looks very different. It is much less about flare up control and much more about stable management, pain control, and stoma care. So, right now, my current daily medication routine looks a bit like this. So, currently, to keep my Crohn's disease managed, I am on the biologic Amgevita, which is basically the slightly cheaper version of adalimumab. It is the injection pen, and things are so well controlled that at the moment I only need to use that once every fortnight. I do have lidocaine pain patches that I can apply to my abdomen when I'm getting those really intense localized pains. I do have my oral morphine again for as and when those days are bad. And for the general kind of maintenance, I take lansoprazole to help with my acid reflux. I take loperamide as and when to help with the output of my stoma. And I take duloxetine. And every now and again, I will need a cyclizine just to help manage nausea. And other than my daily stoma care supplies, that's all I'm on. I do obviously make sure as well that hydration is kept on top of. I do kind of class that as a medication because of how important it is for me to stay hydrated. But yeah, looking back at where I was as a teenager with failing medications, constant hospital admissions, and then just surgery after surgery, to where I am now, it is a complete night and day difference. It did take a long time for me to get to this point, and it was a lot of trial and error, like a lot of trial and error to get here. But finding that management plan and what worked for me, that has just absolutely changed everything for me. And it really has given me a quality of life that I just didn't have at that time and just would never have had. So, if you are currently going through the trial and error phase of IBD medications, or you're just feeling frustrated that something isn't working for you, then please know you're not alone and there is always hope. New medications and treatments, they're being discovered and created and constantly evolving all the time. And I myself am actually participating in the Run 60 for the Crohn's and Colitis UK charity in September to try and help raise money, just to try and help us all get those answers and get those medications, get those treatments, that cure, the why. So as scary as that will be, I'm looking forward to the challenge. And as always, I would love to hear from you. So tell me in the comments below, what's your experience with IBD? What side effects have you been caught off guard most about? Or what medications are you unsure about trying in the future? Let's have a wee chat down in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. As always, if you did find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. I will be trying to release videos on a weekly basis, so make sure you don't miss out on the content. And as always, take care of yourselves, look after each other, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.